Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. Today we're tackling illegal immigration to the US. We're really going to focus on the human side of it all. You send over a ton of interesting stuff, news reports, YouTube videos, and most importantly, firsthand accounts from migrants themselves. So I think with all of this, we can really start to get a handle on what's actually going on.
Yeah, it's a topic that, the media can really oversimplify. Sometimes it feels like they're not even trying to get the whole picture. We're going to try and get a little deeper here. Look at what's happening on the ground, what's pushing people, what's pulling them, what leads someone to risk so much to get to the U.S.
And something that really jumped out at me when I was looking through all this was this term, the donkey process. What is that exactly?
Okay, so donkey process, it's slang. It's a name for a specific route people are using to get to the U.S. illegally. Basically, it involves paying smugglers. They call them donkeys. And these guys, they handle the journey. I mean, they get you through, but it's often dangerous, really exploitative.
Man, that sounds scary. Is there like a story we could look at that really shows this donkey process in action?
Yeah, there's this really sad story of the Patel family. They're from Dingucha, India. And this village, it's been hit hard by people leaving. So many residents have left looking for a better life, especially in the U.S. and Canada. You see these posters everywhere promising visas, a brighter future, really playing on people's hopes and dreams.
So the Patels, they saw these posters too.
Oh yeah, Jagdish, he was a former teacher, but he was struggling to make ends meet. And his wife Vaishali, their two kids, I mean, they all wanted a better life. They dreamed of Vaishali working in a salon, their kids getting a good education, the kind of opportunities they just didn't see back home.
It sounds like, the classic immigrant story reaching for a better life.
Exactly. And they were desperate enough that they said, okay, we're going to risk it all on this donkey process. They scraped together over 6 million rupees. That's a huge amount of money for them. And they gave it all to an agent. This guy promised to get them to America.
6 million rupees. Wow. That must have taken a lot of sacrifice.
He often does. People sell their homes, their land, everything they own, just for a chance at something better. It's something we really have to think about, the financial burden on families who feel like they have no other choice.
So what happened to the Patels? Did they make it?
No. Sadly, it didn't end well. They were abandoned near the U.S.-Canada border. It was freezing, and they were just expected to walk the rest of the way. They were found dead, just meters from where they were supposed to be going.
God, that's awful. It really shows you the human cost of all of this.
It does. Donkey process, it's not just some phrase. It has real consequences. And a lot of the time, those consequences are fatal. Thousands of Indians try this every year, and many of them die.
It's just so sad. Howling about their desperation makes you realize why they'd take such a risk. But is the donkey process like the only way people are trying to get into the U.S. illegally?
No, it's not the only way. And actually, it's changed over time. There's this YouTuber, Dhruv Rathi. He's done a ton of reporting on this. He explains that the UK used to be the main goal. But now it's shifted to the U.S. People try to go through Canada, or even more dangerous, through Mexico.
Right. The U.S.-Mexico border, that's supposed to be really dangerous. What makes these routes so bad?
Well, think about the Darien Gap. It's this dense jungle in Panama. No-law migrants have to deal with gangs, robberies, violence. I mean, even the donkeys themselves can turn on them. It's a really dangerous place.
And if they get through the jungle, what then?
Then there's the desert. It's scorching. And, of course, the wall, a pretty clear symbol of, just how hard it is to get in.
Yeah, the wall definitely makes a statement, but does it actually stop people?
Well over 650 people died trying to cross that border just last year. So even with the wall, if people are desperate enough, it seems like they'll try anything.
So we've seen how dangerous it is, but why do people take these risks?
Dhruv, he breaks it down to three main reasons: economic opportunity, rising unemployment, and political persecution. Let's take a look at each one.
Okay, so first, economic opportunity. That seems pretty straightforward.
It is. It's the American dream, right? The idea that you can come to the U.S. and have a better life. It's not just about escaping poverty. It's about moving up, having a chance to succeed in a way that just wouldn't be possible back home.
Do we have like an example of someone who's chasing that dream?
Yeah, so there's this guy, Mitish Trivedi. He was an engineer in India, really smart guy, but he felt like he was stuck. He moved to Canada 30 years ago, and now he owns a successful restaurant. His story, and there are so many like it. They fuel that desire for a better life, the kind of life many people believe they can only find in the U.S.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about the second reason, rising unemployment? How does that factor in?
Okay, so look at Haryana, India. The unemployment rate there is insane, 37.3%. That's 4 times higher than the national average. Think about the pressure that puts on people.
Yeah, I can imagine the desperation.
People are selling everything they have, risking their lives just to find work, any work. We heard about this guy, Nishay Sharma. He spent 5 months traveling through 9 countries just to get to California. That shows you just how far people will go.
It's a powerful reminder that for a lot of these people, it's not a choice, it's survival.
Right. And then you have the third reason, political persecution. This is a big one that sometimes gets overlooked.
What kind of persecution are we talking about here?
People running from violence, oppression, discrimination. It could be because of their religion, their political beliefs, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. They're looking for asylum protection from very real dangers.
So it's not just about a better job or a better life. It's about safety.
Exactly. And here's where it gets tricky. U.S. law says you have to be in the country to apply for asylum.
That doesn't make sense. Didn't that encourage people to come in illegally?
It's a tough situation. It means people fleeing persecution often feel like they have no choice but to cross the border illegally to turn themselves in to Border Patrol, just to have a shot at protection.
So they're not trying to sneak in. They're trying to follow a legal process that forces them to be here illegally.
Right, and it's important to remember that not everyone crossing that border is doing it for money. Some of them are running for their lives, looking for safety.
Do you have an example of someone who's going through that?
There's Jashanpreet Singh. He's a gay man, and he was brutally attacked in India. He was badly hurt. He escaped to the U.S. and asked for asylum. Thankfully, he was granted it.
That's good to hear. His story really shows how the donkey process can be a lifeline for people in danger.
It is, but even for people with legitimate asylum claims, it's a tough road. The investigation can take years, and there's always the chance they'll be deported if the government doesn't believe them. Not to mention they could be banned from ever coming back legally.
And what happens while they're waiting for a decision?
Many of them end up in detention centers. The conditions are often really bad, and they could be stuck there for weeks, months, even longer, while they wait to find out for fate. The system is far from perfect.
So we've seen the human stories, the reasons behind the donkey process, the dangers, but what about the laws that shape all of this? Do they play a role in this whole situation?
Oh, they play a huge role. To really understand what's going on, we need to look at the history, the laws that are in place, and how those laws might actually be making illegal immigration worse.
Where do we even start with that? U.S. immigration policy seems so complicated.
It is. It's this mix of politics, economics, and social factors. One of the big turning points was this law in 1996, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. They call it ERIRA.
IRERA. Okay, so what did that actually do?
It changed a lot about how the U.S. enforces immigration and how it secures the border. Before the 90s, undocumented immigration was often temporary. People could find ways to become legal even after they got to the U.S., like marrying a citizen or getting sponsored by family or an employer.
So there was more flexibility back then.
Yeah, but then IRERA came along and made it a lot harder for undocumented immigrants to get legal status. They expanded the list of things that could get you deported, even minor stuff, and they made deportation more automatic, which meant families were getting ripped apart.
Wow, that sounds like a huge shift. What happened because of that? Were there any unintended consequences?
One of the biggest problems was something they call the 3- and 10-year bars. If you were undocumented for a certain amount of time, you had to leave the U.S., and you couldn't come back for 3 to 10 years before you could even apply to be legal again, even if you have family here.
That's rough. Imagine having to leave your whole life, your family, for a decade, just to try and get legal.
It was tough. And the crazy thing is, instead of stopping illegal immigration, these bars actually made people want to stay undocumented. They didn't want to risk being separated from their loved ones for so long.
So the law actually backfired in a way.
In some ways, yeah. It made it more dangerous to try and get legal status, so people chose to stay in the shadows. It's a complicated issue for sure.
Okay, so what about the Trump administration? How did they handle immigration? They seem to be really tough on it.
They were. We saw this interview with Tom Homan. He was Trump's border czar. And he said flat out that mass deportations were a top priority. They were putting national security above everything else. They even talked about setting up a hotline for people to report undocumented immigrants.
A hotline? That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it was a really controversial idea. It made people afraid and distrustful. And a lot of people were worried that it would encourage people to take the law into their own hands.
So the Trump administration was all about enforcement and keeping people out. Did they try to change any specific policies?
One of their big targets was birthright citizenship. That's the idea that anyone born in the U.S. is automatically a citizen. Homan said that this was encouraging illegal immigration, that it was a loophole for criminals.
Right, the whole anchor baby thing, that was really divisive. And then there were the ICE raids. It seemed like they were going after families and communities without any real plan.
Yeah, and a lot of times they ended up arresting people who were legal. They were just related to someone who was undocumented. It created this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty all across the country.
It sounds like the Trump administration's policies had a huge impact on the lives of undocumented immigrants and their families.
They did. For some people, their policies made sense, but for others, they seemed cruel and unfair. They felt like they were being punished for trying to build a life.
It seems like there are so many different opinions on this whole thing.
There are, and to really understand it, I think we need to move past the politics and listen to the people who are actually living this. We need to hear from undocumented Americans themselves.
That brings us to this video, Undocumented Americans. It tells the stories of people who are living with the constant fear of deportation.
It's really powerful. It reminds us that this isn't just some abstract debate. It's about real people, real families trying to make a life for themselves in the only country they know.
Okay, let's see what they have to say. Man, these stories from undocumented Americans are just so powerful.
It's that shared experience, living in fear, never really feeling safe. Even though so many of them feel like they're American, they contribute so much.
Like there's this weight on your shoulders all the time.
Exactly. You hear from Jong Min, he says, I feel American in every sort of way. But he's constantly hitting barriers. He's always afraid of being deported. He calls it an invisible prison.
And then Pedro's story, God, it's heartbreaking. He was detained on his way back to college, held in a federal prison for a whole day, strip searched. I mean, how do you even process that?
It just shows you how dehumanizing the system can be. You're treated like a criminal just for trying to live your life.
And Sylvia, her story really hit me. She earned a scholarship and then they took away to financial aid because of her status. Imagine having to fight just to finish school, all while worrying that your family could be torn apart.
These stories, they're proof of how resilient these people are. They go through so much, but they never give up on trying to build a better life.
It's clear that the Trump administration's policies had a big impact on undocumented immigrants. But how do their actions fit into the bigger picture of U.S. immigration policy? It seems like this has been going on forever.
Oh yeah, for sure. The U.S. has a really long and messy history with immigration, and the policies they've had have changed so much over time. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth between welcoming immigrants and then trying to keep them out.
Can you give us an example of that, like how things have shifted back and forth?
Well, there was the Procero program. It ran from the 40s to the 60s, and it basically let millions of Mexican workers come to the U.S. for temporary jobs, mainly in agriculture. It was supposed to help with labor shortages during and after World War II.
So it sounds like a practical solution at the time.
Yeah, it did, but it wasn't perfect. The workers often faced exploitation, low wages, terrible living conditions, and when the program ended, a lot of them were stuck. They had built lives, families here, but they didn't have a clear path to stay legally.
So the U.S. needed them, but didn't really want to give them full rights or a way to become citizens.
Exactly. It's this weird contradiction that we see a lot in U.S. immigration policy. They rely on immigrant labor, but they're hesitant to fully accept the people who are contributing so much.
Okay, so what about border security? It feels like that's always a big issue in politics.
Border security is a tough one. It's so complicated. We always hear about needing stricter enforcement, building walls, more patrols, but the U.S.-Mexico border is huge. It's practically impossible to completely control.
Right, it's not just about walls. What about technology and all the surveillance they use now?
That's a big part of it too. Drone sensors, facial recognition, all of that's meant to stop people from crossing illegally. But all that tech brings up a whole bunch of ethical questions about privacy and stuff.
And it doesn't really address the root causes of why people migrate in the first place, like poverty, violence, lack of opportunity in their home countries.
Exactly. If people are desperate enough, they'll find a way, no matter what's in their way.
So given all of this, where do we even go from here? What are some possible solutions to this whole mess?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? People have been arguing about this for decades. Some people say we just need to be tougher, enforce the law, more secure the border. Others think we should focus on giving the undocumented immigrants who are already here a path to citizenship.
I feel like there's more and more support for comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying we need a bigger solution, one that addresses border security but also creates a fair and humane system for people who want to come here legally. This could mean making it easier to get visas, creating more opportunities for legal immigration, and making the asylum process more efficient.
It seems like there's some common ground there. Most Americans agree that the system is broken. They want secure borders, but they also recognize that immigrants contribute a lot and that we need to treat them humanely.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, that middle ground. We have to get past the partisan fighting and find solutions that actually work and that are compassionate.
It's a big challenge, but it feels like people are realizing that we can't just keep ignoring this problem. It's not going away.
It's not. And it's not just a political issue. It's a moral issue. We're talking about human lives, families, the future of our country. We have to approach this with empathy, understanding, and a real commitment to finding solutions that reflect our values as a nation.
You mentioned addressing the root causes of migration. What can we do about that?
It's complicated, but we need to focus on the things that are pushing people to leave their homes. Investing in economic development, promoting peace and stability, addressing things like poverty, violence, and climate change in those countries.
So it's not just about what happens at the border. It's about creating a world where people don't feel like they have to flee their homes just to survive.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that what happens in one part of the world affects us all.
It's also about fighting the misinformation and the fear-mongering that surrounds this issue. Immigrants aren't criminals. They aren't a drain on society. They contribute so much to our economy, they enrich our culture, and they bring new skills and ideas.
Right? We have to change the way we talk about this. We have to stop seeing immigrants as a threat and start recognizing the value of diversity. It's about seeing each other as human beings no matter where we come from.
We need to move beyond the sound bites and the slogans and have real conversations based on facts. Only then can we start to find solutions that work for everyone.
And that starts with you, the listener. By learning about this issue, by talking to people, by challenging the lies and stereotypes you hear, you can be part of the solution.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, but we've really just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, like how the media shapes our views, the impact of immigration on local communities, the legal battles over immigration policies.
And we have to remember that the DACA process is only one part of this. There are other ways people try to enter the U.S. illegally, like people who overstay their visas and human trafficking.
These are all important issues that we need to be talking about. We can't forget about the human cost of all of this.
Exactly. We have to understand the complexities, the nuances, the gray areas. There are no easy answers, and any solutions we find need to be based on empathy, compassion, and a willingness to listen to different perspectives.
This isn't just about politics, it's about people, their lives, their families, their hopes, their dreams. We have to keep that in mind. It's crazy to think we've only just scratched the surface of this whole thing.
I know, right? It's easy to get caught up in all the statistics and the laws, but what really sticks with you are the stories. The people risking everything just for a chance at a better life.
Their strength is just incredible.
It really is. It reminds you that behind every headline, every policy, there are real people whose lives are being turned upside down.
So what does all of this mean for our listener? Why should they care about the DACA process and this whole issue of illegal immigration?
At the end of the day, it comes down to basic human dignity. These are people who are often running from horrible situations. They deserve our compassion and understanding. We can't just ignore their struggles.
And besides the moral side of it, there's the fact that immigration, even if it's illegal, has a real impact on our country.
Absolutely. We've seen how immigrants, documented and undocumented, contribute to our economy. They fill jobs that need filling. They make our culture richer. Ignoring them or treating them like they're all criminals just doesn't make sense.
I think the big takeaway here is that immigration is complicated. There are no easy answers. We need to talk about it openly, listen to each other, and try to find solutions that are both fair and realistic.
Couldn't agree more. And it starts with each of us. We need to educate ourselves, talk to people, challenge the misinformation and stereotypes that are out there. If we all do our part, we can help create a better system.
We talk about the dangers of the donkey process, the stories of those who've risked it all, and the need for better policies. Is there one thing you hope our listeners will really take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that this is about so much more than border security. It's about people, their lives, their families, their hopes and dreams. We can't forget that.
That's a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one last question you want to leave our listeners with, something to think about?
How do we as a nation balance the need for security with recognizing the humanity of immigrants and the good they do for our country? It's not an easy question, but it's one we need to ask ourselves.
It makes you think about our values, what's important to us, and how we want to be as a country.
Exactly. And how we answer that question will determine what kind of society we build.
Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening and really made me think. We hope it's inspired our listeners to learn more and join the conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the more we know, the better we can understand this complex issue and find solutions that work for everyone.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep talking about this important issue. Until next time, take care.